Welcome to the Ripple of Change podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Otten, and we're going to mix it up a little bit today. I'm working on a new format, so I'm probably going to go off script as usual many times. We're going to, instead of highlighting positivity as I've done in the past, we're not only going to do that, but we're also going to learn how to unlearn learned helplessness. This should be intriguing. So this will be an iterative process. If I screw it up, you're just going to have to bear with me. We're going to start with the Ripple Challenge question in just a second. But today's topic is artists remaking medicine, which is taken directly from this book, which is, I'm not going to lie, one of my recent favorites for a whole host of reasons that we're going to dive into today. So the Ripple Challenge question is, what is your favorite season and why? But don't answer just yet. I've got to introduce my two guests for today. We're going to start with Emily Peters, who is the founder and CEO of brand strategy studio Uncommon Bold and creative director of Procedure Press. In 2016, she survived a near-fatal amniotic fluid embolism in childbirth and became an advocate for blood donation, which that in and of itself is incredible, beyond the amazing book that I already talked about. In addition, she lives in San Francisco with her husband, daughter, and pink poodle, Benny. Mm-hmm. Welcome, Emily.
Hello.
With that, what is your favorite season?
Well, I am a gardener, so I think there's something about spring, right? Where, you have the whole winter and everything is dead and moldy and kind of like, just doesn't feel like it's going to come back. And there's something about spring where everything just gets the memo, right? And comes back and bursts to life, and you have flowers and bees and butterflies and everything all over again. And it's pretty miraculous. So I think I'll go with spring today.
That is beautiful. I love that answer. Fantastic. And we also have Syed Hoda, who is a physician, a musician, photographer, writer. And I flipped the order inadvertently just because I guess I wanted to give you credit. I didn't follow the script, but we are glad to have you. In addition, he is the director of bone and soft tissue pathology and digital pathology at NYU Langone Health and clinical professor at NYU Grossman School of Medicine. He lives in Brooklyn with his wife Sobia and their 9-year-old son, 2 cats, and what sounds like a massive record collection that is apparently too big for a small apartment. We might have to come back to that. But before we do that, sir, what is your favorite season and why?
Wow. So I have a clear favorite season, and we're in it right now, and it's fall. But the reason is a little bit darker than pumpkin patches and falling leaves, because I'm a darker person. I love winter, quite a lot. And for me, that descent from summer into winter is like, it reminds me of one of those situations where something very large is coming and the shadow starts to like emerge out of the corner and take over some of the light and space. Sorry, Emily, I know you said spring. Like the opposite of this situation. But
we got all the bases covered here.
Exactly. So this morning when I was making coffee, it's late enough now, like into the fall, where it's pitch dark when I'm making coffee. And that's what I love, because when I used to wake up and it's light, I used to just wish for the time when it becomes pitch dark again. So that creeping darkness is something I love. And then the fall kind of gives way, and it's very short. It's very limited, that time. Some years it's even too short. But I love that unpredictability of what you're going to get in the fall as well.
Well, this is honestly a perfect start to the show, because if we think about medicine and healthcare and trying to move in different directions, there's not going to be one canned answer, right? I mean, medicine in and of itself is a world of gray, and the fact that we're getting sort of polar opposites with the same question is in and of itself beautiful. I too like fall. Probably more the obvious reasons, the crisp air, the coolness that's out there. Football's back on TV. the Premier League's playing again, all those kinds of things. So I indeed love fall as well. So we're gonna from that. That was wonderful. I appreciate both of your answers. We're gonna move into the first sort of section of the new format here. We're gonna define a little bit of an issue, talk about an analysis, if you will, or analytics, and I'm gonna start with a quote from Emily from her book. In modern medicine of the past century, we've mainly lost this connection. Instead of beauty, our medical buildings turned into sterility and standardization. Hospitals became primarily white inside to show that they were clean and to ease maintenance. Assembly lines for efficient birthing and dying. Wow. When I read that, I had to stop and just kind of soak it all in. And in my mind went to the mental health issues that are currently existing within the healthcare landscape. They're pervasive, top to bottom. Emily, tell me about that passage or that section a little bit. And for those of you that haven't read the book just yet, that's from the chapter entitled Color. So Emily, please take it from there.
Yeah. So when I was writing this book, it was an interesting journey because initially it started out, it was going to be a book about power and like who has the power to change healthcare. And then the research turned that into artists. Artists are the people who actually have a huge amount of power to change healthcare. And then from researching that, I discovered, oh my word, there's like a 100,000-year history of connecting art and medicine. It goes back so far where, the very first art materials were also antibiotics, right, for your face, and coal, and things like ochre. The intersection between art and medicine is so rich. And so it started to reveal itself to me, like, how did we get to this place right now where we feel like medicine is very much a scientific, disciplined, sort of rigorous, very sterile thing. And like, why are we missing that connection into the arts today? And you can really track it back to a fairly recent change, which is the emergence of germ theory about 150 years ago. And germ theory, of course, saves millions and millions and millions and millions of lives because we understand that you need to have clean and sterile spaces. We understand about things like clean drinking water, sewer systems, the idea that like bacteria and germs are around us. But in that very, very rapid change, everything in medicine really changed in the course of about 40 years when germ theory emerged on the scene. And we got, like the book says, these very sterile white hospitals, white clothes in the hospitals, lots of steel, very, very clean and very sanitized, which again saves a lot of lives. But it was a huge cultural shift in medicine, in the way that clinicians practice, and also in the way that patients interact in the system. And some of the kind of more magical and more human parts of medicine were sterilized in that process as well. And so now I think, 150 years later, we're starting to really recognize that transformation that happened, and the massive benefits that happened with that, of course, but also some of the things that we lost, and some of the reasons that I think sometimes our medical system today feels hollow, both for patients and certainly for a lot of clinicians practicing in it, where we don't necessarily feel like fully human when we're in the healthcare system. And I think we're right at the start of another period of rapid change, potentially, where that starts to change again. With AI coming into the scene, this is a massive crossroads for us of how do we become more human, less human? Like, how does medicine evolve from this point? And I think it's going to be very fascinating to watch. And also, I really advocate for the clinicians and the patients in that system. Like, this is a moment to really help guide that change and to be a part of, like, what do we want that next 150 years to look like?
That is amazing. We could probably just spend an hour talking about that.
It's a big topic.
Oh, totally. And
Yeah.
just the connection with the sterility and how that's affected our mental health is
Mhm.
incredible. And I can't say that I truly had ever made that connection before. Uh, Sayed, I'd love to hear your thoughts
Yeah,
on this.
I love that connection. I think it's so cool. I'm not sure I made that connection before either. Although I think, Todd, most of us who've been trained in medicine know that feeling of that cold, you know, the cold room that's perfectly clean and the steel table and, like things like that. But yeah, it's such a interesting point. I'll have to mull it over more. I think. But can I tell you, I think, I've had the experiences to go to medical settings outside of this country, and the one that comes to mind when Emily's talking is my parents are from a state in India, the poorest state in India called Bihar. And when I went to Bihar, I was I think a fourth year medical student, and my medical education was very strange. So I spent part of it in Europe, in Eastern Europe, and then came back to Chicago. So it was a hybrid of all sorts of places. But for 1 month during Christmas, I had gone to Bihar in India, and my aunt, who was an OBGYN, said, "Hey, why don't you come to my clinic and spend the day in our clinic?" And so this is in the poorest state of Bihar. She ran a city clinic, which basically got no money. And she was running a birthing clinic. And that day is something I could never possibly. So all of the 100+ years you just described of germ control, there was absolutely none of it. It's as if it never existed as a finding of human science. They were using, gauze, and they were washing it and reusing it, washing it, using it on another patient. It was basically my brain couldn't actually comprehend what I was seeing. So I was so staggered, back then I was like 22 years old. Back then I used to smoke, and I would go outside and just chain smoke and then come back and think, am I going to be able to digest this possibly? And even to this day, I still think about that experience, and it gives me a framework to look at what you're describing. And I think the one thing I can say about that experience, though, it was not cold. Not cold at all. I mean, and that actually supports your theory of this, because it was very warm, and in fact, like, there was a lot of conversation, and it was very interactive, and it was free. Like, you didn't have to wait for people to stop talking. Like, people were just like, it was like almost like a party of like a medical party. So anyway, I could go on about this, but it's a fascinating analogy that you made, I think.
I mean, maternity care, especially, such a table stake, such an interesting place as a pathologist, right, to like really examine what's happening in our medical system. And even as recently as like my own grandmother, when she had my mom, that you stayed in the hospital for a week, right? And you helped take care of the other moms. So my grandmother was folding diapers and was helping, take care of each other's babies. And now, you're in a private room that's completely sterile. You're not invited to talk to anybody else, and you're sent home, right away practically. It's a very different entry. And, if you look at our maternal health outcomes, not great. Like, we're not necessarily succeeding in making those like safe and, safe and happy births necessarily as a country, right? So it's an interesting place to start. And like, what do we want to keep and what do we want to leave behind, right? We certainly don't want to leave behind the idea of like clean and safe hospitals, right? But we also need to look and see, there are some things that maybe we have left behind that we shouldn't have, right? In terms of how we experience that.
Yeah, two things come to my mind as I was listening to the two of you dive into this a little bit. One was the sense of community, and how often is that lost in our current healthcare delivery infrastructure, and in my mind, to the detriment in a lot of instances, if you will. And also balance. Where's the balance to where we've gone from allowing that interaction to, a lot of times people are in a bubble when they're getting treated, and the interactions are very cold and calculated and robotic, or if you will, fascinating. So this is wonderful. So this sets it up really well. I love this so far. we've got it related to the seasons. We've sort of set the stage about how the mental health issues have been affected by the sterility, whatever. So I'd like to jump into opportunity, optimism, positivity. And Syed, this is where I'm going to read a quote from you in a chapter that was entitled Sight from the book. And I also love this quote. I always, whenever I'm reading, I'm, highlighting. I don't know if anybody can see this, but it's highlighted. I'm writing all over the place. Sometimes there's
Very medical
drawings.
student of you.
Oh, totally. But then when I go back, I can go, ooh, this was the one I really jumped out at me. So a little bit longer, and there's going to be, I guess, a couple ellipses to tie this together. So bear with me here. One of the great human qualities is to want to express oneself. One of the saddest things about education and growing up in adulthood is that people get this feeling pushed onto them that their self-expression isn't necessarily welcome, good enough, or relevant. Especially in medicine, these are people who have taken in a lot of education, and they've had a lot taken out of them too, through the process. Protect yourself from your education. You were a person long before medicine, and you'll be a person long after. Syed, that really hit me kind of hard as I read it, to be honest with you. And I felt that on many, many levels. I'd love to hear your mindset as you were writing that, rather, and also your thoughts hearing it back.
Yeah, I mean, I think this to myself all the time. And I think it's one of the things that I had architected for myself to make me feel better. So, long before I passed it on to anyone in the outside world, that's what's gotten me through my years. And that came to me because in the process of medical education, and maybe you remember, Todd, like there were times when there was almost like a replacement going on. There was this idea that this knowledge base is wide and historical, and it's large, and it's a big, important thing for the people around you. So, hey, make it a priority that you put that doctor in you that's developing first. And, it's very difficult to argue with that when something is being educated to you as something bigger than you, right? So you have a chance to sort of feel noble and selfless in the fact that you are doing something for the people around you, and you will sacrifice parts of you in order to benefit maybe hundreds or thousands of people around you. So there is this morality and this ethics and I say it to medical students. It's like somebody's holding it above your head. That like, hey, are you going to be able to do this for the people around you? But why did they ever have to make this feel like it was two separate things going on? And the purpose of my statement was that, like, yes, be aware of your education, of its importance, of what it could do to other people's lives. But does that mean that I can't protect myself from that education as well sometimes, and make sure that I'm okay? Because I'm pretty sure that if I'm not okay, I won't be able to do the second part of this, protect anybody else. And that was my real function here, was that if you really want to do stuff for the thousands of people around you, then you have to be on. And that means that you're protected.
Well, and I think that also speaks to the importance of self-care. And to me, as I was reading through this, and I'm making a little bit of an assumption here, that part of your self-care is your record collection and is doing the photography and those kinds of things. Is that true, Syed?
Yeah. I mean, my self-care, like doing this interview with you, is part of my self-care. And I think as I when you're younger, you still don't know how your time is going to be spent all the time. So that's kind of when we're most vulnerable, because you think that the senior people to you know how it works, and you trust them to be like, this is how it works. But in medicine, I had plenty of doctors who said, you're always a doctor, whether you're at the hospital or not. And for me, that was a really like poisonous thing to hear. They're like, so if I'm buying toilet paper at the corner store, I'm still a doctor? Like I can't like wander there and not be a doctor? Like, is that always held over my head? And And I think that kind of stuff really seeps in after a while, and people start believing it. They start walking down the street thinking, "Oh, I'm a doctor." But where did we forget how to become the regular person who also walks around and does stuff and doesn't get chained to that idea?
Yeah, I think I agree with you. I think being a physician is part of our identity. Even on LinkedIn, I have husband, father, and I think a couple other things before I put family physician or something like that. Because it's part of who we are. It's not the be all end all, if you will. And granted, it's important. And when we're in that role, that needs to be our top priority. But we can't lose sight of these other things, right? Emily, I'd love to hear your take on this discussion a little bit as well.
Yeah, I mean, I to get a little dark, since I know we have our fall lovers here. This is where we get into the crisis of physician suicidality that we're dealing with right now, right? Where, when people coming up in med school and residency in their careers feel that there is no way out, right? Like, this is the career that they have chosen. This is the path. There is no way. I've talked to so many incredible physicians in my life who just, especially in like a big academic medical center setting, just feel like this is it. There's no other choice. I can never leave this job. I can never leave this institution. Like that there's no agency. And that idea for me as a patient has actually driven all of my writing, of this incredible paradox of these physicians who, as a patient, as a civilian, we see as being incredibly powerful, right? Most respected, white coat, high earning, high education, high status, extremely prestigious people. And then also me as a patient saying, who's going to stand up and help me change this healthcare system? Who's going to help me make it more affordable? Who's going to help me make smart choices? And often running to physicians in there and saying, like, it's not me. I can't do it. I'm demoralized. I don't feel powerful. I can't fight the dean of my department. I can't fight the chair of my hospital wing. And so that disparity, that paradox, is really what drove me to investigate and research and write. Like, how do we understand that just big, giant gap between this power and powerlessness that physicians feel? You can be a brain surgeon, right, who can literally cut into people's heads and to save lives, and just still feel so powerless. Like, how did we get there? That's just really interesting, right? Of like, how do we resolve that, and how do we get, I think the suicidality note, also a stat that is a good pair with that, is the voting. Most physicians are the least likely to vote in elections of most professions as well, right? And so, that's such an interesting thing, where you can save lives and you can be so powerful as a person, but you can also feel completely disempowered in terms of changing the systems and changing and having a voice as a person and not just as a physician.
I agree with you. I've been thinking about that a lot as we're in the fall season again, and there may or may not be an election coming up, and that sense of learned helplessness, and perfect transition into maybe from the three of us. So what can people take away as an actionable item to maybe make a difference in their setting? And I'll be happy to start this. Having stepped away from clinical care a little over 2 years ago, I started missing seeing patients, to be very honest with you. And through a process of joining a very forward thinking ER group and saying, hey, I only want to work part time, and then being amenable to that. Earlier this week, I got to had the joy, the pleasure, the blessing of seeing a couple patients again. There was no restrictions on how much time I could spend with them. There was no restrictions about RVUs for the day or what I needed to accomplish. And I got to spend an hour with both of those patients and really dive into where their concerns were. And I think I gave them a good roadmap to hopefully get to a better place in the diagnosis. And I guess where I'm trying to go with all this is there are opportunities out there. We've got to think differently how we're delivering care. I'm not suggesting that everybody just quit their job like I did, per se. But if you're creative enough and you talk to different individuals, whether it's one of the three of us on this podcast or maybe somebody else out there, there is hope. it can be done. There are amazing people out there and amazing groups out there. So I will get off of my, I guess that's not really a soapbox, but my storytelling, if you will. Sayed, I'd love to hear from you, maybe some opportunities, some ideas. What can you impart to the audience that they can take away
I
from
mean,
this?
one of the things that lately I've been thinking a lot about it is that, for example, everybody refers to their own career path when they're sort of giving advice on career paths. But I will say that something I feel, I'm in academic medicine. I am, now a full professor. I am a director of multiple services. I don't feel like those things traditionally because the people I looked at in those positions weren't like me. So I think for myself, I've cracked something. And what I crack, and like for example, my perception of my leadership and the people who are my effect bosses, like have all been welcoming to the way I do things. So, and I always thought the way I did things was very weird. So that kind of feels very internally reassuring to me. I never wanted to sell at any institution or, I'm not a salesperson, so I don't sell places. But for each person, you find a place. But the one thing, Todd, that really, for me, is underrated is medical students going into specialties. Like this isn't 150 years ago where you chase your quote passion and like go into whatever. Like medicine is not about built around passion these days. It's built around a very complex arrangement of, logistics and finances and education and, geography and rules and regulations. Like this is a real, profession full of all those things. I think people really need to be more introspective before they make choices based on salaries and perception and psychology of like what people think of me and stuff like that. Like that's kind of like in the old days that was true, but like I picked a very, very, very niche specialty for myself already with an even more niche subspecialty in which there's like double digit numbers of doctors in the US. So I knew that this was going to be rare stuff. It's going to be, on the academic side. And it's going to be the way that I build myself space. And I will contribute the most to situations like that where they're not common. And I'm not sure that everybody thinks that. Like I talk to a lot of people and they're like, oh, the job market is like this, so I should do that. So I feel that maybe some introspection to make your choices would be a better thing to do. And I'd be really curious about you and your choices of, your specialties and when you were deciding, like if looking back, you would change that or not.
I was going to chime in. I can't help myself. Emily, we'll get to you in just a second.
Please, I'm loving this. Yeah.
I think that is an absolutely brilliant piece of advice. And I think every medical student should go into the specialty they think they will love. The rest of it will work out if you do that, in my opinion. If you chase the money or you chase the prestige or whatever, there's a good chance it's going to create some obstacles or roadblocks or issues for you down the road. For me, I was a little bit lost coming out of school. I shouldn't say lost. That's not the right word. I was unsure of where I wanted to go. I thought maybe I wanted to be a trauma surgeon because I really liked the intellectual challenge of that, the ICU work, and I also loved to operate. So I did a year of general surgery. I loved operating, but I absolutely hated the culture as I was going through it. I'm like, oh my goodness, this is not for me at all. Fortunately, I was in the U.S. Navy and I got to train as a flight surgeon, which is primary care. And I loved it. And I'm like, well, that's the direction I'm going. And thank goodness I did. Of course, I went through burnout, and that was probably partly my own fault and doing too much and blah, 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 blah. But the fact that I stepped away and then have come back to seeing patients, I think speaks to how much I really love that component of my job. And I wished everybody would do that in medicine. I think it would make a big difference. So with that, Emily, I'd like to transition over to you, and you can go in any direction you want with this. Hope, optimism, art, what have you. Please.
I mean, I will say, just even in the last 5 years since I started promoting the previous book and then this book, I've been spending time with medical schools and medical students. And 5 years ago, when I first started outreaching, I'd still go into groups of medical students and have the experience of asking people like, why do you love medicine? Like, what are you passionate about in this setting? And getting kind of blank stares back from a lot of people, which is scary. Like, you cannot be starting in to a career of medicine and not be like extremely sure about your passion, exactly what you're doing it for. Like, that is a bad choice, right? And I would say over the last 5 years, I've really seen that start to change. I feel like the new generation of medical students are more connected to the mission and the passion of medicine. And I've also seen a massive change in how medical schools and medical education is now seeing people as whole people, right? And so I'm seeing lots of medical schools that have arts programs and mental health programs and, advocacy programs. And, you know, Dr. Hoda, you're like much closer to this, right? Obviously. But I've just seen that like really rapid transformation in the past few years. And I really hope that continues, because I do feel like this generation of medical students probably coming out of the last 5 or 10 years, I think is going to be very different than the generation that we saw maybe even just like 10 years before that.
I think that's fantastic. And I'm very hopeful and optimistic that we get some amazing young physician leaders out of this new generation. Um, and I think we will. And I think it's through these conversations and empowering them and having more mentorship, et cetera, is going to
Yeah.
be a big part to that.
Yeah.
So we've hit our, half an hour conversation time mark, if you will. And as usual, I go over, it is what it is. But I'd like to offer both of you an opportunity for maybe one final thought, and also how can the audience get a hold of you, or any additional plugs that you want to add into that? Syed, if you want to go first, maybe a final thought, and how can the audience find you?
So you can find me on, I mean, I'm around. So I guess Twitter is probably where I'm surprisingly most well known accidentally. I never really wanted to be well known in any way, so it worked out somehow. And I run a record label too called Fog and Lime, which I started last year. And so I'm still trying to sign my second band, which I think I'm being too picky. My thoughts for just people in medicine is there's something I've been thinking of recently, which I keep thinking about, and it's that you did this, Todd. You can also walk away at any time, and this is one of those situations that everybody has a choice. The choice may not be easy, or the choice may not be preferred, or the choice may not be financially rewarding. But worst case scenario, you could just walk away. And I read a painful letter that was written by an ophthalmology resident. You probably know about this story in the last few weeks. I read this, and I read his letter advising people about like the medical training and how difficult it is on people. And I look at such a smart, young, capable person who's so well written, and I just wonder, like, why didn't anybody just say, "Hey, you can walk away. Like, we can walk away, take a few years off, go do something, hang out, do nothing for a little while, like just do something else." And it just gives me a lot of pain to think that sometimes you get so trapped that's not an option to walk away from the profession. So. And I would urge you to talk to people. I get messages all the time, and feel free to reach out if there's anything you want to talk about creativity or medicine.
I totally agree with you. You reach out to any of us that have kind of been through it, and I can attest you can walk away and come out better for it, perhaps in a different mechanism. But feel free to reach out to myself as well. Emily,
Yeah.
final thoughts. How can we find you, etc.?
Yeah, I'm at Emily F. Peters, most places, LinkedIn, Instagram, website, etc. And certainly double that. I welcome anybody who wants to reach out to me anytime. I always really love, that's the best part, I think, of having a book, is getting, people who see it and are like, this is my person. And I love that, like getting to hear from people like that. I will say, we talked about medical education and the process of the last 10 years of becoming more human. What I would love to just put to the universe is the next 10 years. Something I think that's really inspiring to me is physicians who come up in a military way, which I think we talked about this last time, Dr. Otten, when we talked, there's more of an emphasis, I think, on leadership, and how people are trained to be leaders coming out of a military background sometimes. And I would love to see that in the next decade of medical education, and that transformation is more of an emphasis on really understanding the system of medicine, so the financial systems, the different elements of, I think there's been a sense of, with physicians, like, the financial side or the policy side is sort of beneath you, and your focus should just be on the patient. And I would love to see medical education continue, not to just say you're a person, but you can be an empowered leader person, to really understand the medical system, and then to understand the leadership role that you could play, whether you are practicing and caring for patients or not. Like, you have a voice, and you have an ability to lead people and to lead transformations and to try to build a healthier society and a healthier medical system. So that's my wish that I'll put out to the universe at the end of our call today.
I love it. This has been wonderful. And for those that aren't aware, we did change our website recently. This is obviously the book Ripple of Change that I co-authored with one of my patients. The website is rippleofchange.us. And as always, what positive ripple of change will you create today?
Grab your copy today. Ripple of Change is available in hard, soft, and ebook formats. More information at www.ourquadrupleaim.com. Thanks for listening, and let's turn ripples into waves of lasting change. Stay tuned to this podcast as we search for examples of our quadruple aim.